Hello and welcome to Marketing Speak. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer, and today we have Julie Mason joining us. Very excited to have her. I've gotten coaching from her. She's a LinkedIn expert. So Julie helps businesses generate leads and sales on LinkedIn easily and elegantly. Julie has been running workshops and webinars on LinkedIn for over 10 years and has helped thousands of small business owners position themselves more effectively, find their target audience, and understand how to connect and convert with ease. Julie is regarded as one of the top 25 LinkedIn experts in the world by her peers, has been featured on the cover of Social Media Success magazine, is the LinkedIn tutor for the University of Sydney and Recruiter.com, and founder of Linked Sales Formula. Julie, it's great to have you on the show.
Hey, Stephan, thank you so much. I'm honored to be here.
Well, I'm very excited to be talking about LinkedIn because it is such an important social network. And to have you as the expert on LinkedIn to kind of deconstruct what is important and what's not so important for our listeners is going to be really helpful, I think.
Sounds great. Where will we start?
Well, let's start with some of the things that are kind of time wasters or things that could potentially get you in trouble. So the big gotchas that or newbie mistakes that some of the LinkedIn folks are making.
Yeah, sure. Look, it's nearly 11 years that I've been teaching LinkedIn. Time goes so fast, really. But in that time frame, there's been around 7 common mistakes that I often see people making on LinkedIn, and they range from things like getting on there, like they'll hear a podcast or a talk by somebody about LinkedIn. They get very excited about it, and they do what I call a spray and pray approach. They will go and connect with everyone. They post like the Dickens. They, endorse people, recommend people, message people left, right, and center, and it ends up being a little bit futile because they're not really using a strategy per se, and so they get very frustrated and throw their hands in the air and go, yep, this is a whole waste of time. Let's just ignore LinkedIn. That's one of probably the biggest mistakes that I see. Other mistakes are not articulating your message clearly enough for your ideal target audience. Not being clear on your ideal target audience. That's a really big one. The clearer you can get on that, the better you can serve them, and the more easier you can find them on LinkedIn as well. And other things like, just trying to ask too much too soon. You connect with somebody, and then as soon as they accept it, you immediately try and hit them up with your offering, whatever that might be, and instead of adding value and building trust.
I hate that, by the way. When that happens, it drives me nuts. I want to unfollow and unfriend them immediately.
You're not the only one. Everybody feels the same. So even those who do it feel exactly the same, but they just don't know any better, and no one's really taught them. So it's unfortunate. But there's some of the big common mistakes that I see on LinkedIn regularly, and they're also time wasters because, doing that whole asking too much too soon burns a lot of bridges and creates a lot of churn. So, it ends up being very frustrating as well.
Yeah, and they could end up getting their account flagged because enough people submit them to LinkedIn as a potential spammer, right?
Correct, that's right. Either I don't know them, or they'll put them as, they're a spammer, or they'll report them and block them. So all of that, definitely. And LinkedIn seem to be a little bit more twitchy about that sort of stuff than other social networks do. So they have no hesitation of shutting down accounts or putting restrictions on you really quickly. And then you kind of have to, do the whole plead and ask for forgiveness of LinkedIn to get reinstated. And that's, if you're lucky to get reinstated. Most of the time you can pretty much ask for forgiveness and say you won't do it again, and they'll reinstate you. So, yeah.
And one of their terms of service violations, at least my understanding of it, is to give your login details to a virtual assistant or a team member and have them pretend to be you, do outreach, do social posts and all that, as you, but it's somebody else, like a VA, is actually against the terms of service, correct?
Yeah, LinkedIn really tightened up those terms of service last year, 2019, and I think they have been tightening them up, but it was in their previous terms and conditions. It was a little bit more grey area, but last year they got quite specific around that, and that relates to the changes of the GDPR, those privacy rules that came in a couple of years ago. LinkedIn. So what happens when you connect with somebody on LinkedIn, that first level connection that you have, once somebody accepts your invite and connects with you, it opens up their contact information, their phone number, their address, their email address, things that would be locked in privacy until that connection is then authorized by that person to say, yeah, I'll accept your invitation. And so LinkedIn have taken those privacy rules and those laws very, much to heart and gone, okay, well, as if you and I are connected, Stephan, which we are, I have the authority to access your contact information, but my VA or a third party tool, there's lots of third party tools that automate doing things on LinkedIn, because the truth of the matter is LinkedIn can feel like a bit of a time suck as a social network. It doesn't have a scheduling tool. It doesn't help you automate your messaging really well. Things like that becomes really frustrating for people. They've got to do a lot of copy and pasting and manual work on LinkedIn. And so outsourcing to VAs or using third-party tools is something that a lot of marketers reach out to try and do this. But LinkedIn have really gotten quite clear on their rules around that and said if they find you using these third-party tools, more so around the connecting and the messaging of your connections, and in that parameter, they'll delete your account. So they're not mincing their words around it. Tools that do the content scheduling like Hootsuite or Buffer and the like, they're okay because you're not actually giving people access to your privacy of those connections that you have. It's actually just to the newsfeed. So there's a bit of a difference there between those third-party tools as well. It's good to note.
Yeah, and what would be an example of a third-party tool that LinkedIn doesn't want you using?
Well, there's about 40 actually different automation tools for LinkedIn where you can do automatic connections, you can do automatic message sequences, kind of like, third-party email tools like MailChimp, that you would use to send emails out. These third-party tools on LinkedIn do a similar thing. So some examples of those are Duck Soup, Linked Helper, Meet Leonard, LinMail Pro, GPZ tool. There's a whole range of them. I've over the years I've tried several of them, some of which I've mentioned, and others that I haven't mentioned. But they all have, some great time-saving ability. But I stopped teaching about them because I understood when LinkedIn changed their T's and C's last year, they got really serious about deleting people's accounts, and people did have their accounts deleted by using them, and I just didn't want to risk my clients with that information. But I guess it's up to your listeners here on the podcast. Take it at your own risk is what I would say. But my advice is, if you do use these tools and they do save a lot of time, my advice is go well down under the limits of what those tools will suggest that you can do. For example, they might suggest that you could connect to up to 100 people a day. My advice is keep that really low, down between that 25 and 50 rather than 100. For messages, they might say you could do up to 1,000 messages a day. My advice is probably bring that down to between 150 and 200 max, and that way you will probably fly under the radar a little bit more using those tools than you would if you max them up and go, wow, I can message 1,000 people a day and let's go hard, kind of thing. I would say ease it back, keep those, limits down a little bit, and hopefully, fingers crossed, you might be okay.
Yeah. And you mentioned Duck's Soup as an example. It's D-U-X, not D-U-C-K.
That's right. Like a quack duck, it's D-U-X soup. Yeah, that's right.
Okay, cool. And then there are tools within LinkedIn that you can pay extra for, like Sales Navigator, and you can send in-mails. What's your position on that? Because that can be abused as well. And I get in-mails every so often, and I know it's an unsolicited offer, so I never want to read those in-mails when they come in. They're never like, oh, I met you at a conference sort of thing. So
Yeah.
I'm curious what your
LinkedIn,
position on that.
Do you know, great question. I love these questions that you're asking. LinkedIn have, over the years, spouted that in-mails on LinkedIn will get 99% delivered to the recipient. I think that's died off considerably over the years because so many people have abused them and started to do that ask too much too soon kind of approach with them. Personally, I actually don't recommend my clients use them, interestingly enough. They're valuable if you really must use them to get to a hard to reach client. But my advice is if that client is that hard to reach, I'm probably going to suggest they're not going to respond, just like you said, to an in-mail on LinkedIn. I would probably say you might want to try a different approach and might be off LinkedIn altogether. So it might require you to think a little bit more creatively with your marketing and try a different strategy altogether.
So what would be an example of a different strategy that maybe is offline or not going through LinkedIn to get the LinkedIn connection and communication started?
Well, maybe LinkedIn is a place for some people. Their clients may be not necessarily as responsive on LinkedIn, but LinkedIn could be a great place for you to do your research and really find out who the connections are that you need to speak with. And you can, by all means, still reach out to them on LinkedIn and offer a connection request. But with that, I would probably suggest to some of them, if they're not responding on LinkedIn, if they're not taking up your connection request, let's say over a month period. And I say a month period and everybody's going to go, oh, really, a month? It takes that long? Well, here's the interesting statistic on LinkedIn. It takes the average person on LinkedIn 8 days to accept an invitation to connect. That's the average time. So I often say LinkedIn is the slow lane of social networks. It's not the speedy lane that some of the others are. So you do need to have a little patience. But some other approaches would be, potentially if you find somebody's name that you find is your ideal target audience in that company, the right contact person, then maybe instead of reaching out on LinkedIn, maybe you want to send some direct mail, because we don't actually get a lot of direct mail that isn't a bill nowadays. And so you can go old school sometimes and make a larger impact. There's a great book I'd recommend your listeners to read called How to Get a Meeting with Anyone by Stu Heineken. And Heineken, what's his name? I've forgotten it. You'll find it. How to Get a Meeting with Anyone by Stu. STU is his first name. I'm pretty sure it's Heineken. And definitely check that out. He's got some great strategies that will help you get through to those hard to reach people that may not respond on LinkedIn. And that's one great resource for people who are looking for those kinds of strategies.
Yep, it's Stu Heineke, by the way.
Stu Heineke, thank you.
Yeah, that's a great book recommendation. What about tools that help you to identify the contact details of somebody? Let's say that you're trying to recruit, or you're a job seeker and you want to reach somebody that doesn't have their email address on their website. You could use a tool like hunter.io, and then it shows their contact details that kind of pulls together from different sources. Do you have any experience with those sorts of tools? Do you recommend them?
I haven't used them, to be honest with you. I find that in the years that I've been using LinkedIn, I am really great at finding the people's details and then cross-referencing that through some Google searches and maybe finding their contact details that way. It's not too hard to find details, but yeah, hunter.io and stuff has a great place if you're really struggling. My advice is, look at ways that you can connect that build trust. And LinkedIn is a really trusted website by most people. They see it as, a place that has great value. A lot of people have, well, we've got over 700,000 people with their profiles on there. And most of the Fortune 500 executives and companies have, profiles on there. Doesn't necessarily mean they will respond all the time on there, but they'll definitely be on there. And so you can do a bit of research. But I often say to people to cross interface. I remember when we were working together, I think one of the things that I cross-referenced for you was actually Fortune 500 list on the fortune.com website, so that we could then find what companies were in your target market, for example, and then cross-reference those target companies on LinkedIn, sorted through their employee lists, filtered them down with keywords on Sales Navigator to get the right people that we thought would be the best people to approach. So definitely there's a great load. I mean, Google just opens a world for you. So you've got a million of different, ways you can approach this to do your research. Absolutely.
Yeah, and you helped me create a Dream 100 list of prospects through this approach of cross-referencing with Fortune 500 and with like Internet Retailer 500, that sort of thing, and looking at ideal job titles. Yeah, that was just a really great approach, so that you're not just, as you say, spraying and praying.
Yeah, exactly. I always say to people, the best thing that you can do to start off with, if you're going to use LinkedIn effectively, is start with who is your ideal client avatar. The clearer you can get on that, the easier it is to find them. And I think that was something that you and I worked on quite, specifically when we started working together, that I felt that your existing avatar was still a little vague. And when we went through that process and really delved into it, it became really easy for you to then find who they were. And because we knew what their fears, wants, needs, and frustrations were, you can target your approach. You can write your marketing message, including your profile, your company page. Even your content becomes easier to create because you now have a really clear picture of who that ideal target audience is. And I think this has been really critical throughout my entire career, because while I've been online for about 12 years, my background's 25 years in traditional sales. I know I look really young. I started when I was 2. But I've done 15 years in door-to-door cold calling before the internet became a thing, right? And so understanding who your target audience is, how you can connect with them, that's been something that I've really brought through into the online space, and understanding how to approach them, because doing door-to-door cold calling is hard graft. That's not easy stuff to do. And understanding how to approach people in a way that breaks the ice, reduces their barriers down so that they'll actually listen to you, as opposed to put them up immediately, and add value to them at the same time. That's a really important, part of approaching people, whether it be offline or on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
So it's really crucial.
Yeah. So creating an avatar with, as you said, fears, frustrations, wants, aspirations, and weaving that into, let's say, the connection request, into posts that you make on LinkedIn, and your articles that you're publishing on your blog and so forth. This is really helpful to get folks to connect with you in an emotional at an emotional level, and not just see you as hawking your wares. And there's an exercise I learned from Taki Moore called the 4 forces, where you identify what those fears, frustrations, wants, and aspirations are. Are you using that approach to come up with?
I'm not familiar with Taki's approach. Tell me more.
Yeah, so he draws 4 quadrants, where just a line down the middle vertically, and then a line down the middle horizontally, and then the fears and frustrations go on the left-hand side of the paper, and then the wants and aspirations go on the right-hand side. But the top quadrant on the right-hand side, that is for wants, and then aspirations is the lower right. Fears are the lower left, and then frustrations are the top left. And the reason for that is the left side of the page is for moving away from, the right side is moving towards, and then the top is the immediate, real kind of things, and then the bottom half is for imagined or future. So then you understand that where these are placed kind of in a construct, in a framework, and then you can say, well, what's real and immediate as far as something they're moving away from. Let's say, well, let's take your target audience as an example. So you're targeting small business people who have interest in improving their LinkedIn presence and creating leads and opportunities through LinkedIn. So what would be a frustration of somebody like that?
Frustration would be that they have had a stab at social media previously, but they haven't had great results. So they are a little dubious around, social networks altogether. That would be one, frustration that they have.
Okay, so I love that you said this, because this gives me a great example of the line, the fuzziness of the line between fear and frustration. Is that really a frustration, or is it more of a fear? Because it's projected into the future that if they had a bad experience in the past, that it's going to happen again. And this time it might get worse, and they might get in trouble with LinkedIn, might get their account turned off, they might end up ticking off a lot of connections and alienating some folks. Right? So that's more fear-based rather than immediate and real. It's I'm not dismissing the importance of the fear, but
frustration is I don't know how to use it. That would be
there you go.
I don't know how to use it. The fears are along what we just said, that they don't know how, social media and the frustration. But a big fear for them is making the wrong move, saying the wrong thing on LinkedIn. They don't want to look like a fool, and they don't want to ruin a big opportunity. So they're very tentative, and they're quite fearful about doing a perceived wrong thing on LinkedIn. So it's quite a common fear, that one.
Yeah. Right. So if you address that in your copy on your landing page, then they're going to feel that connection to you, and they're like, yeah, this person, Julie, gets me. Yeah.
Very true. Thank you. I haven't heard Taki's version on that. I'll definitely put that into practice. It's great. Thank you.
Yeah, and listeners, by the way, I did interview Taki, and I recommend that episode. So, check it out. Let's talk a bit about the potential sequences that you might send somebody through, kind of like an indoctrination sequence or an ascension model, or something where you're moving someone through the buyer journey, or from suspect to prospect to buyer to repeat buyer, and you're doing it through LinkedIn messages. What would be a good approach, or maybe some things to watch out for?
Yeah, absolutely. So the common things that people do wrong, we'll start off with those first, shall we? Because it's an important thing. First of all, whether the thing to remember is that when you send the connection request, you have the opportunity to send a personal message, and a lot of people don't do that. So I definitely say, first of all, send a personal note with your connection request, because it just lets people know who you are. One of the big fears around, accepting invitations on LinkedIn is I don't know who you are, and therefore I'll either just leave it sit there, I'll ignore it, or, I'm not going to do anything with it because I don't know who you are. Particularly in Australia, we're really skeptical here in Australia. Elsewhere in the world, I understand that, a little bit more open to broadening networks, etc., and that's great. But definitely here in Australia, we tend to be quite skeptical and quite, wary of that kind of aspect. But so that's one of the first mistakes. The second mistake that people make is that when people have accepted their invitation, they immediately, as we talked before and how frustrated you were with that, they immediately hit you up with their services and buy my stick or let's have a coffee, or they go straight for, let's get married, as I call it, right? They go straight to that instead of wooing their prospect and building trust and romancing them. They go straight for, the end result, let's have sex. And I wrote a LinkedIn article on this called What Does Sex and LinkedIn Have in Common? So I do recommend people read that on my LinkedIn profile. You'll find that if you go onto my profile and check that out in my articles. It's got some great strategies there as well with some good script and messaging tips for people too. But one of the things that I do recommend when you're wanting a good sequence for LinkedIn, I would, again, add that personal connection request, that message when you're sending your invitations. And with that, all you have to answer is, why are you reaching out to me? And at that point in the conversation, you don't necessarily want to tell them that you're trying to get their business. You just want to alleviate that security, issue that they have about opening up their network to somebody unfamiliar. I often say one of the best ways, particularly with high net worth clients that you're trying to gain, that the best thing to do is do what I call the LinkedIn two-step. And the LinkedIn two-step is finding a mutual connection between you on LinkedIn that you have a strong relationship and the other person has a strong relationship with, and reaching out to your existing connection on LinkedIn. So let's say I know, Joe Blogs over here, and Joe Blogs is connected to, let's just say, Joe Biden, right? What the heck? And so Joe over here, Joe Blogs, I've got a really great, strong connection with, and he is connected to Mr. Biden. And so in this case, I would reach out to Joe Blogs and say, hey, Joe, I noticed that you're connected to Mr. Biden. Is there an opportunity that I could reach out? Would you recommend that I reach out and connect with him, as I believe I could bring some great value in this area? You've known me for some time. Would it be okay if I mentioned your name in reaching out to connect with Mr. Biden? Now, Joe could say no, and that's okay. That's his prerogative. And if that's the case, then you need to honor and respect that, because he may not have a great, strong relationship with Mr. Biden in this case. But if he says yes, then what your next step is, so that's step one. Step two would be to reach out to Mr. Biden and say, hi, Mr. Biden, I was having a conversation with Joe Blogs recently, and he recommended that we reach out and connect. I thought I'd just drop you a line here on LinkedIn. I look forward to getting to know you further. And cheers, Julie. So it's a really soft touch, but it will open a warm recognition of that strength of relationship that he already has with Joe Blogs, for example, and he'll be more open to accepting that. So that's the LinkedIn two-step. It is a two-step process, and step one may require you to find the right mutual connection. So that may take a little bit of time. But let's say that client could be worth $50,000 or $100,000 for you. Is it worth taking that time to go through and find the right mutual connection in order for you to be able to do that? In my opinion, absolutely, it's worth taking that time to do that initial step one. And then step two, you've got hopefully a warm entrance to your ideal target, connection that you're wanting to make there with Mr. Biden, for example. So that's one approach that you can do on LinkedIn with that initial connection. That works really well for high net worth clients that you're maybe finding a little difficult to connect with by just sending a standard connection request. Hey, I saw your profile on LinkedIn and thought some of the thoughts you did around XYZ topic were great. I'd really like to connect and learn more about what it is that you do. That's another nice way of doing it. but that may not cut it with some of the higher net worth individuals. So just pay attention that you've got to find the right approach for the right audience, if that makes sense. Once they have accepted your invite to connect, then my advice here is to add value. I like to call connections like opening an emotional bank account, because everyone understands the whole concept of a bank account. When you open a bank account, you generally have zero balance. If you withdraw down on that, you go into overdraw and you'll get into trouble and get fined by the bank. But if you add a deposit, your bank account grows, right? So if we look at that in the human connection format, that when we connect with somebody, at that point of connection, we have a zero emotional balance or a zero trust account with them. And if we ask something immediately of them, we're going to go into overdraw. We could risk the connection being severed. We could risk just, pissing them off, for lack of a better word, really angering them. And it could risk that loss of opportunity that could have come with that. There is the chance that they will be open to that as well on the other side. Not everybody's the same. So there will be people who will go, if it hits them at the right point in their journey, then they might be open to accepting your invite at that point. But it's a rare thing. The feedback that I've received over 11 years is most people get really ticked off when you do that. So instead of going into overdraw, what we want to do is add value. We want to put in a deposit. We want to get to know that person. And that could be anything from as simple as saying, thanks so much for accepting my invite. I'd really like to get to know you a little bit better. How long have you been working for XYZ? Now you don't want to be too trite with the high network clients. You've got to be really, careful with what you're offering there. But my favorite go-to, Stephan, my favorite go-to is having a strategically written LinkedIn article that I will then say, thanks so much for accepting my invite to connect. I always like to add some value to my connections. And so I wrote this LinkedIn article that you might find helpful. It's on this subject. I hope you enjoy it as my gift to you. I noticed that you were in this industry, and there could be a couple of points at point 6 or 7 that you might find really helpful. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Cheers, Julie. Now, the reason I use a LinkedIn article as opposed to a blog post on my website, for example, is that these connections trust LinkedIn. They're on LinkedIn. And at this point, you are still a querying factor in their mind. They don't trust you yet. So rather than send them off to an unknown website, keep them on LinkedIn and use a strategic LinkedIn article that you can add that URL for the LinkedIn article in that message and keep them within that space that they know, like, and trust. So that would be a good strategy that I would recommend.
Gotcha. How many connections do you have on LinkedIn?
As the scale goes for LinkedIn experts, probably a lower amount than most people in the world. I have about 7,500 thereabouts on LinkedIn.
Gotcha. But it's the right 7,500, I would imagine.
That's what I like to think. I'm actually going through, believe it or not, I'm actually doing quite a cull on my LinkedIn connections, because I've been teaching this, as I said, for 11 years now. And over that time, when I first started out, I didn't know how to do this strategically. I was doing what everybody else is doing, having a spray and pray approach. And so some of the things that I did back then don't serve. And so I've come to that point where I want to clean up my newsfeed on LinkedIn. I want to get it tighter and more strategic. So I'm not necessarily looking for more connections. I'm looking for the right connections, as you said. So I'm actually culling. I think in the last month, I've reduced it down by about 600 or 700 people in the last month. So yeah, I still probably have about 2,000 to go from what I'm gathering at the moment.
Well, hopefully I'll make the cut. I'll survive. Now, you said something very important. I think applies to the LinkedIn platform throughout a lot of the different functionalities, and that is keep people on the platform. If somebody is a new connection for you and you send them off to your blog to read a thought leadership piece, that's riskier, and it's actually not aligned with LinkedIn's motivations. They want people to stay on the platform. So when you're writing, let's say a small post for your LinkedIn, or you're uploading a video, if it's a native video, it keeps people on the platform. Versus a YouTube video, it will get buried by the algorithm. And same thing with these posts that you write, might be kind of like a quote or a nugget of a tip or something. But if it forces people, in order to get the full value out, to go off the platform and read your blog post, that is not aligned with LinkedIn's motivations, and so you will get demoted in terms of your reach for that particular post, right?
Yeah, look, like all social networks, they want to keep you on their platform. So when you post something in your newsfeed, when you're updating and creating content, adding a link to, let's say, a YouTube video as opposed to uploading that video natively to LinkedIn, the YouTube link will definitely get degraded in the newsfeed. So you'll probably get less engagement on that post. You won't get as much traffic going to it, or people liking or commenting on it, because LinkedIn will go, driving traffic away from us. Yeah, we'll just degrade that in the feed a little. But if you actually use LinkedIn's own tools, such as, their native video, they've released, you can apply now to do live stream video, which I think is quite hilarious, because you need a third-party app in order to do LinkedIn Lives, which I can't stop smiling about. And using, tools like their articles, etc., on LinkedIn. I'd much rather you do that. LinkedIn have got some amazing tools. It's a very deep and complex website and has quite a lot to it. But a lot of people just haven't scratched the surface on these tools yet. So, yeah, absolutely.
I'm curious, do you have a live stream capability for your LinkedIn?
No, I haven't applied for it yet, but I have been given, I'm feeling a little, giddy with excitement, and I have been given the invitation to have a LinkedIn newsletter, which is by invite only at the moment. So you can't even apply for that. You actually have to be, royally tapped by LinkedIn to have a newsletter, which is quite exciting for me. So I'm really looking forward to having a LinkedIn newsletter. And essentially, for everybody out there, what is a LinkedIn newsletter? Well, it's basically getting people to subscribe to reading your articles on LinkedIn. So articles used to be quite the pinnacle a few years ago when they released them to the general public. And whenever you wrote one in the beginning, it would notify your entire connection list that, hey, Julie or Stephan wrote an article, go and check it out in your notifications tab. But as LinkedIn have grown and grown with their content strategy, which they want to become the biggest business content strategy or hub on the internet, with much more content going on there now, LinkedIn articles kind of got degraded themselves in the whole waft of native video coming on and all of the other things that we have as a choice. So LinkedIn are now trying to resurge articles a little bit, and the newsletter option allows people to subscribe to your articles so that each time you get one, your subscribers will get that notification again. And that's pretty cool. So I'm really excited about that.
Yeah, that's great. And the article feature was called LinkedIn Pulse. And it was very much touted as an important thing to do, as important, if not more, than posting on medium.com, et cetera, but then it really didn't get a lot of buzz in recent years. So is that because the reach was dialed down, or some other feature was removed from this? Like, what was it about LinkedIn Pulse that made it not a big deal anymore?
I think that they had other features that they wanted to focus on, and that the notifications tab was getting quite full of other important things that, whether it was congratulating people on their work anniversary, etc., which has always been there. But letting people know that so and so has done a LinkedIn Live now, for example, or whatever that might be. It just seems to have gotten a little degraded, and articles don't quite get the love. A lot of people get, they'll say to me, and particularly in the last 2 years, Julie, what's the point of writing LinkedIn articles? No one sees them anyway. Well, that's not exactly true. But you do need to distribute them on LinkedIn a little bit more actively. So you need to be a bit more proactive about getting them found on LinkedIn. One of the things that people should note is that your LinkedIn articles are literally cached by Google and are searchable by Google. So I wrote an article a couple of years ago on tips on using emojis on LinkedIn, right? And there was some really interesting scientific research that if you use a smiley face emoji in your messaging or on your posts, for example, that people have the same psychological reaction to a smiling emoji as if they're looking at your real face. How fascinating is that, right? And so I gave some tips on, are emojis appropriate on LinkedIn? And if so, how do you use them? Well, that got cached by Google. And now Google drives more traffic to that article than LinkedIn do. And it's had something like 55,000 views at the time of this recording. So that's a significant number of visits to a single article. So yeah, absolutely. I think articles still have their place, but you do want to know how to distribute them effectively around LinkedIn.
Yeah, interesting. Now, there is a stat that you shared with your mastermind group. I was on a recent call, and it had to do with the number of connections, or not connections. It was more like touch points that were required from a content marketing perspective before you could close the deal. Do you remember that stat?
I do. I call it the irresistible customer relationship path. And essentially, it basically means that, and this is going back, this is something I was taught in sales years and years ago. So back when I was still door knocking, the irresistible customer relationship path is how do you get somebody from first time you've met them to building trust, buying from you, and how many steps will that take? And back in the day when I first started, in sales, it was 7 to 9 steps, depending on who you talk to. So about, let's say, 9 steps, right? And it's about the 5th touch point where you actually become a factor in that prospect's mind. And from there, you start to build trust and can harvest low-hanging fruit, etc. But nowadays, that has extended. I understand from the research that I've done that to now get to that, trusted, that factor in a prospect's mind and to close that, it's gone from 9 steps to 17. I shouldn't say steps, but touch points, as you rightly called it. Yeah. So it's 17 touch points nowadays. And that could mean, for example, let's say, what is a touch point? Well, a touch point could be sending a LinkedIn connection request. And when they accept, send them a nice value add message. That's step 1 or touch point 1 and touch point 2. But you don't maybe necessarily want to keep it on LinkedIn all the time. Maybe touch point 3 is on the LinkedIn app, for example. And if I come onto the LinkedIn app, I know that people can't see this on here at the moment, but when you go to, if I was to message you, Stephan, if I go to your profile on the LinkedIn app and click message, it gives me the opportunity to send you a voice message, right? And so instead of doing a text-based message, now I could humanize it by doing a, hey, Stephan, I just wanted to reach out and say hi, send a friendly hello, and say how much I really enjoyed your post that you did this week. Congratulations, it was really good. Look, if there's anything I can help you with, please let me know. Give me a holler. I'm here to help. Otherwise, have an awesome day, and just something light and bright. You don't want to be too pushy in that regards, but you could just humanize by taking it off text and now becoming a voice, a human voice. So it's not just this, kind of disconnected text messaging that's going on. So it could be touch point 3, for example. Touch point 4, maybe you get Stu Heineke's book, How to Get a Meeting with Anyone, and you get a great idea to send some lumpy mail. Maybe, like, for example, I've got these here, right? I've got some really great mugs with affirmations on them at the moment that I've got in what I call my plunder cupboard, my little cupboard where I keep gifts that are good to send out to people. So I packaged up a couple of those that I'm going to send out to prospects, today, and to say, hey, I've really enjoyed your posts. So I've gotten great value from them. I just want to give you this little gift. I hope it brings a smile to your day, and send them a nice little lumpy mail. So again, it creates a touch point. It's a top of mind presence. Lumpy mail is going to go through the PA. They're going to get past the executive assistant, for example, and land on their desk. And so you'll actually create some touch points. But Stu has some fantastic examples, none of which any of them are coming to my mind at the moment. But he's got some great examples in the book as well.
Yeah. I learned some of those from Dan Kennedy, who was a guest on this podcast too, and I attended one of his events. It was fabulous. He is a direct mail genius.
And do you know what? I think it's underrated. I send probably about 5 thank you cards a week out to, whether it be clients or prospects or people that I've had a strategy session with, whatever it might be, just to send a thank you card, because that makes such an impact. And what's really interesting about the sending an old-fashioned card, snail mail, is that people keep it on their desk. It's a rarity. So you then end up not only being, top of mind for them, but when people come into their office, they go, oh, that's a really cool card. You want to make it stand out. And there's some great tools for doing those as well. And Send Out Cards is a worldwide tool that anybody can use that does a great job with that kind of marketing. It's appreciation marketing, essentially. And it works brilliantly.
Yeah. Yeah, that reminds me of, in the book, Influence by Bob Cialdini, who was also a guest on this podcast. He interviewed a guy who was one of the top car salesmen in the country, and his secret to success was sending out greeting cards for all sorts of unusual holidays, not just the major holidays. And he would put some personal note in there that made it clear that he knew the person and their family, and he was checking in to see if everything's great with little Bobby and his little league and what have you. It was very, very effective.
Yeah, and I think that's really important. The more personalized you can make your marketing to your ideal, and if you've got a low-end product or service, and I'm talking, under $1,000, it may not be viable for you to go highly personalized. But if your target audience, your target client is $10,000 in value or above, it is worth doing some personalized marketing. Do some research. Like years ago, I had a client, and one of the strategies that we did with her was basically we got the PA, her personal assistant, her ideal client, their personal assistant on board, and said, look, can you find out, Jane's shoe size and let me know. And so the PA snuck in and found out the shoe size of her boss and gave it to my client, Andrea. And Andrea then found a beautiful pair of shoes, found out what types of shoes she liked, bought a beautiful $300 pair of shoes, and sent her the left shoe in the mail. And she said, now that I've got my foot in the door, let's have coffee and I'll bring the other shoe. They're my gift to you, right? And so that's an example of how you can have a little fun with it as well. Don't be really buttoned up and too uptight about this. Make it interesting and curious for people as well. I've had friends who have sent out, a driver from the golf club set, send out a driver. Let's drive your results out of the park kind of thing. And then let's catch up and I'll share how I can help you do that by X, Y, Z. And I'll bring you the rest of the golf club set as my gift to you, So it's a little bit of emotional bribery to some degree. But these are strategies that Dan Kennedy would have taught over the years as well. I'm sure they've all filtered down from good old Dan. He's brilliant at that sort of stuff, right?
Yeah. It reminds me of how I gave a package of hot dogs, like Nathan's famous hot dogs, to this one TV producer at of the Morning Blend show in Tucson as a thank you for having me on the show, and I got a booking right then and there for another follow-up appearance because he was really touched. He's big into hot dogs. I'm vegetarian, and so I don't even shop in that part of the store, but I had to go find some hot dogs when I got to Tucson to do my TV appearance, and then I wrapped it up all nice and everything, and it was a big surprise. He actually posted it to his Facebook because he was so touched by it because of the personal, the research that's involved to know that I know this about him really made an impression.
You need to become a little bit of a stalker, as I like to call it. Stalking, by the way, guys, in real life is totally creepy. Don't do it. But in social media, it's totally acceptable, right? So you need to do a little, as you call it, research. I call it stalking. I'm just fun that way. But yeah, find out, even if you have to ring up their assistant and say, look, I'm wondering if you can help me. I really just want to know the shoe size. And that's going to get the assistant curious, and she'll be then, oh, wow, you're going to send her a pair of shoes. How cool is that? It's out of the box. It's different. It's thinking, differently, and it certainly makes an impact. So, and by the way, make you the gatekeepers, those assistants and the receptionists and stuff, make them your friends. They are there to help you if you get them on board. They're not there to, shut you down, but you treat them well and they can be your best asset.
Yeah, they can be a real ally. Another thing, too, that I wanted to point out is LinkedIn has a feature now where you can pronounce your name and record it as an audio so that folks will stop mispronouncing their name if they click the play button to hear. Like, I get Stephen all the time, even though my name is Stephan.
Yep.
That can be eliminated by...
So have you done it?
I haven't done it yet, but it's on my list. I will do it soon. By the time this episode airs, I will have that done. But if the person that you're targeting, you're creating a voice memo like you described, and it's possible you could misspell or mispronounce their name, then at least go watch some video interviews or something where you hear their name pronounced properly if they don't have that feature enabled.
I'm dyslexic, and so some people's names just trip me up completely. So guys that are listening to this, please go and do that so it makes my life really easy as a dyslexic. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, that's a great tip, Stephan. LinkedIn has been coming out with a slew of new features lately, and it's some of them are okay, so and some are really great, and I'm really enjoying the innovation that LinkedIn have brought out recently. It's good to see.
Yeah.
Hopefully it continues in that vein.
Yeah. Now, one thing that's been around forever that I don't see enough people taking advantage of, it's so basic, and that is customizing your username, your URL. Anytime I see a long string of numbers in there at the end of their LinkedIn URL, I know that they didn't, like, they're a newbie, essentially.
Yeah.
And that's not a good look. So do you want to talk about that?
It ties in with your expertise as the SEO guru, right? Because customizing your LinkedIn URL is a way to actually optimize your profile for Google search. But it also, when you've got it on your email signature or on your website or perhaps, on your business card, I've seen people put them on their business card for their LinkedIn URL. You want it to be customized so it's got your name. So a couple of tips with this is just make it your name. Don't go and get creative and put, your name and then what it is that you do at the end of it, for example. And I've seen a few of those. I would much rather you just keep it to your name. Years ago, Stephan, I did an interview with SEMrush actually on optimizing your LinkedIn profile for search results. And we're talking search in terms of Google here, because LinkedIn have quite a bit of metadata that goes on through the profile that comes up on LinkedIn search. And the URL of profiles is one of the most critical ones. So a couple of tips around this is get rid of the numbers, just use your name where possible. And I've got a really common name. Julie Mason is surprisingly as common as John Smith. So I didn't actually get Julie Mason. So what I did, and I tested different variations on LinkedIn and the Google search result over a period of about 6 months. This is going back several years now. And what I found that worked the best was Julie Mason and then a number, just a single digit behind it. So I think my URL is Julie Mason 1 on my LinkedIn URL. And I found that actually gave me better results on Google and, across the board than any other iteration did. So, yeah.
From a branding perspective, wouldn't it be good to, rather than be Julie Mason 2 or 6 to be the Julie Mason?
I tried that.
Was that taken as well?
That was one of the ones that I tried in that 6 months, and it actually dropped me down in the Google search results because it didn't understand the as a name. It kind of went the Julie as the first word. So it actually went badly for me as opposed to better for me. So I actually dropped the. That was, I think, one of about 7 different iterations that I tried on that custom URL back then. So what worked for me, and I guess what you could do is you could do 1 hyphen potentially instead of a number. So instead of Julie Mason, all one word with a 1 behind it, you could do Julie hyphen Mason or put your middle initial in there. But a lot of people don't know my middle name. I don't give it out anywhere. So that can confuse things as well. So I just found that the single digit at the end worked the best in all the tests and measures that I did back then. I should go and try it again, shouldn't I? I haven't tested it for a long time.
Yeah. Well, I also think that from an SEO perspective, the URL is not a big factor. It's pretty minor. And so, yeah, it's lost importance over the years. So you might get a different result if you tried it now. And I think from a brand perspective, being the Julie Mason, it just sounds cool. I like the sound of it. Okay, so I know we're running short on time, so maybe we could do a little lightning round for the last few minutes. How's that sound?
Go for it.
Okay.
Let's go.
What's the difference between endorsing and recommending, and why do we want one versus the other?
So endorsing is really great for optimizing your profile on certain skill sets, but it doesn't, and while it has some credibility, it isn't seen as the best credibility because so many people can do what we call a happy click. In other words, they'll endorse you, but they've never tried your service or product out before. So it's what we call just a happy click. Somebody's trying to do something nice for you, but there's no weight. A recommendation, however, must come from a first level connection. And it's where they take the time to write something about your product and service or about you as a person. And so that actually stays on your profile and holds a lot of credibility. So where possible, increase your recommendations. Ask your past, bosses or colleagues or current colleagues and boss for recommendations on your LinkedIn profile, or even some of your A-grade clients as well. In fact, definitely your A-grade clients you want to give you recommendations. So highly recommend them.
Yeah. In fact, you might have a client who's prevented from giving you a testimonial. Like this was the case ages ago. I had Verizon as a client, and they were prevented from giving a testimonial, even though they were very happy. But they were not prevented from posting a LinkedIn recommendation. So I used that as the testimonial.
Nice work.
Yeah, that worked out well. Sales Navigator, what's your favorite feature or capability for Sales Navigator?
Without hesitation, it's the advanced search that Sales Navigator gives you that is, it makes me drool. Seriously, it's that good. And the reason for that is because you can really drill down into your research from even the members of the groups that might be your target market or in, to postcode, distance from a specific postcode in your area. So much that you can drill down in there that helps you take, your search results from massive to really granular and getting very tight with who your ideal target audience is and finding them more clearly.
So what's an example of one of the the search fields or options inside of advanced search that's really valuable?
Well, I think, for example, what was I doing recently? I've done quite a few recently, so I'm just trying to think of one. Um, so we were looking for, I've got a commercial cleaning client who is busy, really busy at the moment with commercial cleaning during our friendly little pandemic that we've got. And she really wanted to focus more on companies of a certain size within a geographical zone. She lives in a more remote part of Australia, population maybe not as high there, so really needed to find the companies that were on LinkedIn that had certain number of employees in a specific industry. And for example, Sales Navigator, you can do that really well. Yeah, so they're just some of the ones that you can do, but there are so many. I could be here all day, doing those types of examples.
Yeah. Okay. How about an innovative way to do a case study, to convey a case study or success story via LinkedIn? Would it be as a post? Would it be as a LinkedIn article? Would it be as a native video? Like, what would be an example?
Look, I love using case studies on articles, and while they may not get quite as much traction, this is where you really have to do the distribution of the article, and that takes a little bit more time and thought. I think an article's really well. And the reason I go that way is because case studies usually will tell the before, during, and after results of what you've done with that particular client, right? And stories are how we relate well. So they become a great value add piece in that touch point marketing that you're doing in that direct messaging. So they're brilliant for using in those examples, really great ways.
Yeah.
So yeah, I love case studies, but I personally would do it in an article. There's so many other ways. You could interview, if you wanted to do it, for example, other ways, you can take that one client, you might interview them on video, or like we are today on Skype, for example, on video, and you could record that, upload that directly into the newsfeed. Make sure it's got captions though, because 86% of LinkedIn members watch video without the audio on. So it's really important that you caption your videos on LinkedIn. So make sure that video is under 10 minutes for native video on LinkedIn. So you're getting to the heart of it, but you could interview that. You could then take that transcription, for example, make that into an article, add in a couple of pictures that would be appropriate with that. Lovely little call to action at the bottom of the article that's gentle but still takes them to the next step, and use that as, a nice upload. You could even embed the video into the article as well, so don't be afraid to do that too. Gives the people who receive that link to the article the choice of, do I want to watch or do I want to read? So yeah, you could do that, and then you could cut the transcription up or the article up a little bit and make 4 or 5 posts out of it as well. So there's a couple of things that you could do with that. One little case study could actually end up being, 5 or 6 pieces of content.
Yeah, that's great advice. And what's your position on SlideShare? Is that something to take advantage of? Because LinkedIn, of course, owns SlideShare now.
I believe that they're just selling it.
Oh, really?
I think word this week that SlideShare is moving to a new section. But having said that, LinkedIn acquired SlideShare, I think, in 2012. And the reason that they did that was because it had more business traffic than any other website on the internet at the time. And it still has over 60 million unique visitors per month, which is pretty serious traffic when you think about it. So for those of you who don't know what SlideShare is, and surprisingly a large number of people don't, it's where you upload your PowerPoint presentation. So if you think about uploading video to YouTube, if you've got a PowerPoint presentation, you would upload that to SlideShare, and it's a great place to showcase your knowledge, etc. I think I've got quite a few slides on SlideShare or PowerPoint presentations on SlideShare, and I love having them up there because it gets me a lot of free traffic. And I think I get something like over 1,000 views a month to my PowerPoint presentations on there. So, I mean, that's 1,000 views, guys, that you may not be getting at the moment. So if you've got a PowerPoint presentation that you're happy to share with the general public, I might suggest that you upload that to slideshare.net.
Yeah. Yeah, and also with SlideShare, you can add an embed, just like a YouTube embed. They have their own player, and then you could add that to a blog post on your site so that people could step through your PowerPoint presentation that relates to that blog post.
Oh, it gets sexier than that. You can actually create lead gen strategies with that as well. They have a little opt-in box on SlideShare that you can actually use to generate leads. So it's a paid feature, but it's definitely something that you can do. So it's quite cool.
Yeah, that reminds me of the turnstile feature in Wistia, where you can watch part of the video and then it stops and asks for the email address in order to continue with the rest of the video.
Yep, very good.
Cool. And then lastly, what's your position on LinkedIn Learning, which used to be lynda.com, and then they acquired it and rebranded it. So is that something that you're bullish about? You think that folks who are kind of thought leaders, results leaders, would benefit from creating a course on LinkedIn Learning?
Look, I think definitely it's a great space for you. I mean, all of this comes down to branding, right, and positioning yourself as a thought leader. So if you've got a course that you would like to, that maybe might be an introduction course or something that's really relevant to your target audience that would be quite, again, it comes back to who your target audience is, then yeah, I definitely suggest putting a course up there. I'm really enjoying, particularly this year, watching LinkedIn Learning. I've been doing quite a few courses on there and I'm really enjoying them. So just on weird and wonderful topics, by the way, they're not, on sales and marketing. I'm just broadening my learning base. And sometimes I get tired of reading. I read a lot. But this year I've actually read less and I've watched more. I've just gone back to reading. I think I've read 4 books in the last month, but so I'm back to my usual reading voracity. But I've really enjoyed LinkedIn Learning this year and just, listening to some amazing knowledge that's out there. Yeah. I think what the challenge is with LinkedIn Learning is that it's only available to people on the premium level of LinkedIn, whether you've got Business Premium or Sales Navigator. It's not available on the free version of LinkedIn. So from that aspect, I think you lose a large part of your database. But I know, for example, my local state library, for example, when you sign up with the library online, you get free access to lynda.com, which is essentially LinkedIn Learning.
Right.
So a nice add-on for the libraries to give. So you might find that somewhere in your part of the world has LinkedIn Learning for free if you're on the free version of LinkedIn.
Yes. In fact, my library, LA Public Library, has LinkedIn Learning as one of the benefits, along with New York Times and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, a lot of libraries will have that.
Most of them will, I would suspect. I think Emirates Airline used to offer it as well on the in-flight for people flying with Emirates. You could get LinkedIn Learning on there for free as one of the channels. So yeah, different companies have provided that as a great add-on, and I think it's a great space for you to go and have a look. So my advice is, if you're not on a premium version of LinkedIn in terms of a member subscription, then perhaps check with your local library or maybe your state library and see if you can get a free online membership to the library and then access Lynda. And check out some of the courses there. Note that most of them are short videos that don't go for very long and they're sequential. So there's some great tips there that you can do for creating a course on Lynda as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Julie. And for folks wanting to work with you or follow you, learn more from you, where do you want them to connect?
Well, please reach out and connect with me on LinkedIn. That would be great. And do send me a personal note and say that you've listened to me on Stephan's podcast so I know where you've come from. That would be grand, absolutely grand. And look, if you want to check me out, you can always go to my website, juliemason.com.au. There's some great resources on there as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Julie.
Thanks, Ben. Thank you so much.
Yeah. All right. So listeners, please take some action here and spruce up your LinkedIn profile and become more of a value-added participant in the ecosystem on LinkedIn. And we'll catch you on the next episode of Marketing Speak.